Hi, this is Ben with Novalux Stereophonic, and today we're going to do an overview on the Harman Kardon Citation I Stereo Control Center. This is an all-tube stereo preamp that was manufactured in the early 1960s, and some of the key features that this thing has is a 5 Hz to 80 kilohertz frequency response range, which is outside on both the top and the bottom of the human range of hearing, so that was a little bit ahead of its time. It also boasts a very clean signal path. There are tons of controls on this device, and it seems like that all might get in the way and muddy up the sound, but realistically, when you have these things in the zero position, they're basically out of circuit, making this a very clean, straightforward signal path. Another great feature of this is all of the vacuum tubes are DC heated, so there's a little rectifier circuit just for the vacuum tube heaters so that you don't get hum induced on the AC line. Alright, so let's jump in and take a look at the front panel. So we're going to start with the right side here. So this section is dedicated to the everyday type controls, where this is more of the set it and forget it type section over here, or if you're messing around with different turntables and cartridges, you might be hanging on this area a little bit more. But this is the main control center for the unit, and it shows that this is what gets used the most, especially on this unit. So there's almost no cosmetic damage to this section over here. It's very clean, very little scratches. On this side, we can see a little bit of a circle here from where somebody has been grabbing this and spinning it around quite frequently, and we do have some of the silkscreen lettering starting to wear off in the function knob. So for the most part, this user was likely doing a lot of source selection and obviously loudness control. So in this area, I'm going to start with the function selector. So on the left side, we have 3 line level inputs: aux, tape amp, which just means a tape deck or transport that has a built-in preamplifier section that takes care of all the EQing in the first gain stage, and then tuner. So those 3, there's no difference between them on the back. It's just a selection between them. On the Phono 1 and 2, the Phono 1 is for moving magnet only. Phono 2, you can use either a ceramic or a moving magnet cartridge, and the tape head is optimized for older tape decks that may not have a preamplifier built into them. So that's going to be, what's referred to as a low-level input. So the signal coming in is a lot lower. It needs an extra boost before it goes into the line stage on this unit. Balance control is pretty self-explanatory. The original control, I don't think, has a center position. This control was replaced. It now has a center detent, which is kind of handy. So that stops there right in the center. We have, for the mode selector here, stereo, blend, AB, mono A, and mono B. So in stereo mode, it's basically straight up left and right channel, coming in left, going out left, coming in right, going in right. When we go into the blend mode, this control comes into play and allows you to take the left and right images and move them towards the center. This is to compensate for if you've got a room and your speakers are very far apart and you're not getting a center image. You're hearing left and right channel only. This blend is supposed to help bring that image into the center if you've got a big space. So that's how it operates in blend mode. In AB, it's just going to take anything from the A and B channel on whatever source you're selected to, put it down to mono and send it out both channels. Mono A or mono B means that if you're selected on mono A, whatever's plugged into the A input is going to be copied to both channels. Now, whenever we're looking at A and B on this unit, A is referring to left, B is referring to right. So we have channel A marked here on the left side of the unit. So this is your left speaker, right speaker for tone control, and then the balance falls as well. So if you spin this to the left, it's going to control the A section. You spin it to the right, it's going to control the B section. Loudness knob is pretty self-explanatory. There's a control section in the middle here that has some things that we should go over. The contour is basically another term for what we see on 70s receivers, like a loudness button. So we'll demonstrate that here in a few minutes. The tape monitor is going to allow you to directly monitor the tape input without having to select that input on the function selector. Stereo in reverse is going to flip the stereo image left to right, and that comes in handy for if you've got a recording, an old recording or something on a record that was not recorded properly, and you're listening to an orchestral piece and your percussion section is on the wrong side of the image. That's where you would use that stereo reverse. You could also use it if you accidentally plugged in one of your sources backwards and you were too lazy to go around to the back to fix it. And then the phasing control is similar. If there was a recording that was done out of phase, you can correct it so that you don't have to, physically change the wires every time you want to listen to that piece of media. Or you can use it if you, again, were too lazy, you hooked your speakers up backwards, you didn't know about it, you're lacking a bunch of bass, you go in reverse mode, hey, it sounds better. You can go ahead and use that and then flip it at your convenience later. The power control is kind of neat. So this is a rotary. So when we rotate it to the left, it turns off. When we rotate it to the right, switches the unit on, and there's a little incandescent bulb in the back that kind of lights up this button. All right, let's go ahead and get some music going and go through the rest of these controls. So right now we're on the aux input. I'm gonna go ahead and just go through the tone section. Again, the way to design this, when you're in the 0 position, you're supposed to be completely flat. The tone circuitry is not even in the signal path. So let's turn this up a little bit. We're just gonna take the bass down on both channels. To wait for this to kick in a little bit. I'll take the treble up right now while we've got some, perfect timing right in between tracks. We'll wait for the next one to start. So this is taking out treble. We can also cut the treble. Take that back to center. We can boost the bass. Left channel all the way up. Cut it. Use the contour and turn this down a little bit. This is meant for keeping your bass intact at low listening levels. It's a little bit overpowering in my opinion, so it's not as effective as the loudness knob on a lot of those 70s receivers. One more thing to go over here. If you are in stereo mode and you want to use the center channel jack on the back, in stereo mode, the blend control acts as a gain for your center channel output. So that's kind of a neat feature. If you want to experiment with running a 3-channel system, this is kind of a cool piece to do it with. It's that simple for the line stage section. You're going to have the same function on any of these 3 inputs. The only other source I've got connected right now is a turntable on Phono 2 with a moving magnet cartridge. So let's get over to the Phono section. And here we've got a unique setup in this corner. This gives us a lot of flexibility for input media. So if you're running one of those tape heads that doesn't have a preamplifier section behind it, we can take this turnover control, take it down to tape, take the roll off, move it into the flat position, and then you're listening to an optimized EQ for a tape head. For this media that I'm on right now is a 33 RPM record with an RIAA curve. So we would be at RIAA in both positions. We've got selections for 78. According to the manual, the LP section is for older American recordings. There's a London setting for European recordings. And I'm just gonna go through some of these so that you can hear the difference. So we're gonna start out at RIAA. That's into tape. And the manual actually tells you to experiment with these controls, because you might find that you really like a little bit of one of these other EQ profiles when you're listening to certain stuff. All right, last thing is the low cut section, and this is universal. This works on all inputs. You're either going to be flat, which the manual is funny. It says that's for the true purist, the true audiophile. Subsonic is going to cut out stuff that's outside of the human range of hearing, and rumble is more for like turntable noise. So that does it for the front panel. The only other thing I want to mention is on this model, if we turn this power knob while the amplifiers are on, there are going to be some residual noises that are going to come from the power supply and stuff inside of the preamp, and you might end up with your drivers pulsing in and out a little bit. So my recommendation on this, like any other setup, is to turn off your power amplifiers first before you turn off the preamp, and then the reverse when you're powering it on. Turn on the Citation I, let it stabilize a little bit, and then turn on your power amplifier behind it. All right, next we'll swing it around the back and we'll take a look at the tube complement and the inputs. Okay, we've now got the Citation I spun around, and we're going to take a look at the tube complement and the inputs and outputs. So the Citation I uses 4 12AX7 tubes and 5 12AT7s. Now, I'm going to go over their specific function in this circuit because it may matter to someone depending on what they're going to use this preamp for. So the way that this is laid out is your first 4 tubes here are channel B. The bottom row, 1, 2, 3, and 4, are channel A. And then this tube is dedicated to the blend and the phase reversal circuit. Now, just a quick note on that, which is kind of interesting. You can actually run this preamp with this tube pulled out. It will function, but what you're going to get is, if you use the phase reverse switch on the front and put it in the reverse position, one of your channels won't work, and the blend control won't work. But if you're running it, in a regular stereo configuration with no reversal, you can actually run this without that tube. The only other side effect is it's in series with the indicator light bulb on the front, so you won't have an indication that your device is on. But if you get in a pinch, just know that temporarily you could run that 12AX7 in a different position if you needed, you didn't have any spares and you wanted to get it back up and running. If, say, this one went bad, you could pull this one out, put it here, take the bad one completely out, and run it while you're waiting for a replacement to come in. Just a quick note. I don't recommend it, but if you want to, you can. All right, so the next thing I want to go over is the tube function. So the 12AX7s in each channel, the first 2, are dedicated to the low-level input section. This is for your phono stage and your vintage tape input. The second 2 tubes in each channel are for the line stage. So this is where the high-level inputs, the aux, the regular tape deck, tuner, that's where those get fed in. So they're going to get fed into this section here and then come through the preamp from there. So the point I'm trying to make here is, if you're buying this preamp and you're never going to listen to vinyl, and you want to retube this thing, don't spend a bunch of money on these 12AX7s. You're not even going to listen to them. Put your money in the 12AT7s here. In addition to that, these 4 are the only ones that are really in play in the audio circuit unless you're using the balance knob or the reversal circuit. So don't go spending $50 on an old stock tube for that position. It's not going to do you any good. Alternatively, if you're really into phono stuff, which you probably are if you're looking at one of these, focus on getting some nice 12AX7s for this section, because that's where this preamp really shines. Is it's all the different selections it has for phono EQs. All right, let's go through the inputs. So this is the low-level section where we have tiny signals, the phono stage, the vintage tape deck that has no preamp built into it. Our selections here are tape head, Phono 1 and Phono 2. These 2 sets of jacks down here are both for Phono 2. You can run either moving magnet or ceramic in this section. On Phono 1, you can only run magnetic cartridge. Now, just something quick to point out, these are little jumpers that I've made up out of some vintage looking connectors, and all that's going on the inside of this is this center pin is electronically tied to the outside shield, effectively grounding out this input. This helps keep the low-level input section quiet for regular operation. We've got a nice lug here for tying your turntable ground. This is not stock. This is something that I put in that has a little bit more use. The original is just one of these little screws in here, and it's not that great, so I put on this little nice knurled nut. The high-level input section has aux, tape amp, and tuner, which correspond to the selections on the front. And then it's kind of weird, in the input section they put tape out, but whatever. That's your output for your tape deck for recording and such. And then in the output section here, you have your A and B channel outputs, and they've paralleled the two jacks here. There's no difference between the two. A good example here is if you wanted to hook a you could use this for biamping. You could use it for hooking up a stereo amp to power some speakers, as well as sending the full signal to a sub and then running a crossover. You could run two completely different systems, but they'd be tied to the same volume control. But there's, that's just a parallel set of output jacks. Center amp out. This is going to operate when you're in stereo mode and be controlled by the blend control for if you want to fill in your center image with a third speaker. And then we've got a set of 3 switched outlets that are controlled by the front panel rotary switch, and a final one that is always on. Now, one last thing to note before we go to the next thing is that this is designed for 117 volts AC mains. Okay, I just wanted to take a few minutes and go over a concept that sometimes gets overlooked when people start collecting vintage hi-fi. A lot of these vacuum tube preamps and amplifiers from the 60s were designed for 117 volt AC mains. Nowadays the standard is closer to 120. Here in New York City this morning I'm at 123.2. Most of the time it's sitting around 125 to 127 depending on the time of the day. So what we need to keep in mind is that it may not seem like a huge difference between 117 and 127. But the first thing that happens when the AC mains hits the circuit is it goes into a power transformer that steps up the voltage to supply the B plus to the tubes, which when you're dealing with a power amplifier, you could be multiplying your mains voltage by 4 to 5 times to get up to that plate voltage. And if we're dealing with a 10 volt difference coming in, that translates to 40 to 50 volts once it goes through the power transformer. And if the engineers already designed the amp to operate kind of at the top spec limit of these tubes, we're kicking an extra 40, 50 volts above that, it's bound to cause problems. So the solution that I tend to go with when I'm selling a vintage preamp or amplifier from that era is I build a little transformer box. So this is what's referred to often as a bucking transformer, or in this case, it's a fixed autoformer configuration, where there's just a transformer in this box that is wired to permanently take whatever comes in and drop it down by about 5%. So this isn't a magic box that gives me 117 volts out to work with vintage units. All it's doing is taking whatever comes into it, dropping it by about 5%, and it's just going to give me a safer running range for these vintage units. So as we can see here, I'm at 123.2 on my mains, and then when I've got the meter plugged in here into the actual transformer box, I've got 117 about coming out. So this is right in that range that we want to operate that Citation at. Okay, now we're getting into the fun stuff. I've got the top cover off the Citation I, and we've got a glimpse into the the quality of engineering and construction on these pieces. Harman Kardon released this in 2 versions. You could either buy it as a kit and build it yourself, or you could buy it pre-assembled from the factory. This one is a kit unit, and luckily the gentleman that built this back in the 60s did an excellent job with arranging these components and wiring everything up. You can see this. I've never seen this process before, but there's this almost like nylon cord that's tied up every 4 inches, looming all these wires together. I've never seen anything like this before. It's a very clean build. I've replaced all of the aging capacitors in here. We've got Vishay, Panasonic, just really nice high quality parts in here. And the main thing I wanted to show you here is the power supply. So normally what I do is I restuff these cans to keep an original look, but I'll show you this here. So this is one of these big capacitor cans that used to live in this spot right here. Normally I can get this material out of there, but this stuff was so stubborn coming out of this can that I opted to just use the bases. So I've cut off the original base from this capacitor and used its its mechanical bottom to secure the new capacitors here. So these would normally be inside of the can, but in this case they're exposed, but everything's there. It looks good. And just a quick note on the rest of the stuff. These are all the parts that ended up getting pulled out of this unit. As you can see, there were some switches. These were actually replaced sometime in the past, so that this must have been a heavily used unit. Luckily, when I started this restoration, I had a donor piece and I was able to source some of those unobtainium parts. So this one is all set and ready to go. Let's flip it around and take a look at the bottom, which will show off the power supply rebuild. All right, look at that. Again, this looming here, everything so expertly routed by the guy that originally built this unit. I'm just super impressed when I opened this thing up. And then I've done the power supply rebuild on the left. This is a complete rebuild. So we've got new safety capacitors, all new rectifier diodes, new power resistors. You already saw the new electrolytic filter capacitors on the other side. And then I left the original like cardboard paper cans on the top side, just eliminate them from the circuit. And we've got the new capacitors mounted on the bottom here. Okay, to wrap up, let's review what we talked about so far. So the Harman Kardon Citation I was developed in the early 1960s, and it's geared toward the discerning audiophile. It has a wide bandwidth, a simplified signal path when the tone controls are in the 0 position, a plethora of turnover and roll-off adjustments for somebody that's interested in multiple turntables, multiple cartridges, early source media. It's got the ability to run a center channel speaker with an adjustment on the blend pot here for your gain control. If you're in the stereo position, if you're in the blend position, it offers you the ability to fill in a center gap if you've got a large spacious room and the speakers are all the way out to the outsides. It runs off of 412 AX7s and 512 AT7s. Remember, if you are not going to use the Phono stage, don't dump a bunch of money into the 12 AX7s. They're not going to do you any good. If you are going to use the Phono section, you pretty much have to focus on the entire thing because the Phono stage does run through the line stage. So if you're going to heavily use the Phono section, you're going to want to look at 4 nice 12 AX7s, 4 nice 12 AT7s, and then if you are not planning on using the phase reversal circuitry for correcting old recordings, or connection errors and stuff like that, you don't need to focus on spending a bunch of money on that fifth 12 AT7. It's more of a feature tube, and it's not going to deliver if you put a super high-end tube in that slot. We also talked about the voltage concerns with this device. This is designed for 117 volts AC. If your mains are around 120, it's probably not going to hurt it, but if you do have mains that sit 122, 125, something like that, you might want to consider running this on a bucking transformer or a variac. So that about covers it. If you like what you saw today, let me know, and there'll be more to come.